the log's going to set more, since the log is just a little more awkward, usually that's going to bring you forward. So it's much harder to get into your hips in that situation. So it's just a little more of a conscious effort to really get into kind of more of a hip drive. However, just because of the fashion and because of the implement, you're going to be a little more knee heavy compared to an axle. Axle is going to be very similar to a barbell. So you're always going to be able to get a nice bend into the axle, just because it's sitting a little more on top of you rather kind of away from you. But also on the log, I'm not sure if you ever noticed this, but since generally it sits up a little higher, the range of motion is a little shorter. So usually it takes less. You actually take less time, or you have less time to get under the log. So generally the split between like a barbell and axle and versus a log is going to be a little different, just because you have less time to get under the log. So I think it's a really big important in terms of creating that separation, again, by having that proper dip and really be able to pop that over.
Yeah, so I see a great carryover from the barbell to the axle. You see quite a lot of people who like even just touch on the weightlifting principles of a jerk, and they can kind of take to the axle seemingly a lot quicker than you. Basically, you see a lot of people having a lot more success with the skill of like transferring a jerk to an axle than they do to a log. Do you see that? And if so, what's the theory? Basically, why do people struggle to jerk a log?
When they go to like a push press or a strict press, it's a little more of the comfortability. It's a little bit more of a conservative movement. When you add in the jerk, it's a little more of a risky movement, but it's a high reward, higher risk type of movement. So on a jerk, you generally have to do sometimes 6 or 7 things right, where on a push press, you might only do 3 or 4. Strict press, you're not even bending. You really just think about bracing, breathing, and squeezing the glutes and finishing with the triceps and all. So it's less things to kind of worry about. So that's why you probably would see more of those conservative movements when it comes to the log, just because the log is, it is a staple of our sport, but is also the most kind of difficult movement. So also, I think you might have mentioned it in one of your stories too. So of course I had a good time looking through that yesterday. So even breathing at the top of a log is very difficult. I got recently asked about kind of make a video.
What do you mean at the top, like where you receive the clean or overhead?
So for instance, after you clean it, being able to take a breath, like normally on a barbell and axle, it's much easier to take a breath, brace, and then do your dip, and then and then finish the lift. Right. But generally on the log, it's very difficult to breathe at the top. So the one thing I like to preach, even in my seminars, some of my YouTube videos, is a good rack position, being able to keep that rack position up, which is generally your delts. So being able to hold the delts up, so make that the shelf rather than the log actually physically sitting on the chest. I know that like guys like Zadrunas will be able to kind of years and years have been able to kind of hold that, like hold logs on his chest, but usually he's doing if body weight logs for himself, right? But for the weight class athlete where we're always pushing way over body weight, I think being able to keep that log shelf high and having that log sit up there gives us the ability to be able to breathe before we actually dip. So then when we breathe, be able to brace, that brace helps us keep the dip even tighter and more fluid, and then be able to have more success going forward. So I think it all comes up the ability to really keep that great rack position. So it's much easier to keep that great rack position on a barbell, on an axle, but the log is always going to be the most difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the thing that I find most challenging personally. I feel like with like an axle or a barbell, I can almost find like where you receive a clean and dumbbell, where you can almost find like that weightless, that seemingly weightless rack position, whereas where basically you're the weight's going through, like loaded on your skeleton, whereas I struggle to find that personally. and with a lot of clients, I struggle to find that position with lock. I did used to find it. I used to be around 115 kilos at my heaviest, and I could find the log rack position there when I had a bit more mass. It felt a lot better, but as I've got lighter, I'm currently like 88 kilos today, and I just feel like I don't have the mass there. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's just you have less room of error, or where you really have to either be able to have the flexible, like kind of flexible lats, so you can keep that position higher and then keep the head back and all. So I think you have to even be more conscious